I think this is why it's so important. And if you don't remember anything from this video, I will hope that you remember it's so important to incorporate this concept of death and dying into everyday life. What is up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, I am Dr. Jasmine. I am a licensed clinical psychologist as well as a mom of 2 little girls, and it has been honestly so long since I've filmed a video for you guys. I recently took a social media break as well as a YouTube break because I experienced a family emergency. My dad was hospitalized due to COVID pneumonia over Christmas and over my birthday, and going through that experience was very eye-opening and stressful and overwhelming, of course, but it also inspired me to make this video for you guys to talk about how do we talk about death and dying and family emergencies with our little ones. These are such hard moments as parents because not only do we have to process everything for ourselves, but we also have to help our little ones make sense of what's going on around them. And so it can feel very chaotic, feel very overwhelming. And I wanted to just kind of share my experiences with you guys, as well as share what I know about what cognitively children can understand about death depending on their age, as well as some good things to keep in mind as you try to navigate these difficult conversations. Knowing, of course, we're not going to get this right, and it's just more important just to try to show up as best as we can for our little ones. So I'll be diving into that, but before we get into the video, I just want to share with you guys that I have a free upcoming live discipline workshop for you guys. It will be on January 23rd, 25th, and 27th, and I'm going to be breaking down how to stop yelling and how to get your child to listen to you without yelling. And so I'll share, why you've, on a psychological level resorted to this method and what it's costing you, as well as a step-by-step guide on how to improve your child's compliance. So you're not going to want to miss this workshop. It is limited time, space is limited, and so the link will be in the description. Or you can go to www.themomspsychologist.com/workshop to reserve your seat. Again, it's completely free. There will be Q&A. I'll also be giving away a bonus guide to those who attend live. And I will also be sharing about my private community, the Mom Sisterhood, which will be reopening really, really soon. So you're not going to want to miss this workshop. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I can't wait to connect with you guys. So again, www.themomspsychologist.com/workshop, or you can visit the link in the description box below. Okay, so let's get into this video. I first just want to back up a little bit and share a little bit about what happened with my dad and how we're doing right now, because I know a lot of you guys are wondering about that. So he started developing symptoms the Monday of the week of Christmas, and he just started feeling really, really sick. I had talked to him that Tuesday, and he said he was starting to feel better, but then Wednesday is when we had to take him to the hospital because he was completely weak, and he was hospitalized until New Year's Day, and then now he is, thank the Lord, in recovery, and he is in a skilled nursing facility where he is trying to regain his strength. But it was really, really scary. They had to continuously up his oxygen, and he went to the mask BiPAP, and then the next step would have been the ventilator. But thank God he did not get to that point, which was a miracle, and we were really happy about. So now he's in recovery. Now he's trying to get stronger because he's really, really weak from the virus. And so what my family went through was, my dad lives in Texas and we're in California. So my sister and I decided to travel to Texas to be near him to show our support. And just we dropped everything and went Christmas Day, actually. And we actually drove because we wanted to limit our exposure to the virus. So it was a long drive. Took us a whole day, a little bit more than a day, I think, with all the stops and everything. But I had to abruptly leave my little girls. I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. She'll be almost 4. And so I had to explain to them. And what I said very, very simply was that Papa is sick. Papa is in the hospital, and Mommy and Auntie are going to go check on him and, send him lots of love, that kind of thing. So I just kept it very simple. I was going to go check on Papa. And they understood that. They didn't really ask any questions. They did kind of get a little confused, thinking I was working when I was gone, but so just asked that because they stayed with their dad, what was going on and where Mommy was, and we communicated via FaceTime every day. But what I really want to focus on is the time that it takes after you return from, if you experience a family emergency or just have to be away from your child a long periods of time. That's where, it can kind of be surprising, or that we don't realize that that's where it's going to take a lot of the time. I think a lot of the prep work can be in like, okay, how to prepare your child for this emergency and all of that. And it's like, just keep your language simple. Invite them to ask you questions, but keep it brief and simple is always the best strategy or best approach. But what we kind of, I think, neglect to think about is that it's going to take them a long time, or it may take them. I would say every child is different, but oftentimes what happens is that they've had all this stress, they're keeping it together while you're gone, they're trying to make sense of everything, and then you come home and they're like, ugh, right? And that's what happened with my little ones. The first day I came back, they were excited, we had fun, we played a lot. And I think that's what I've really been focused on the last week or so since I've been back, is just playing a lot with them, spending a lot of time putting away my phone, and really just trying to be present and reconnect. But that day, the first day that I came back, was great. We played and all of that. And then that night, they had a hard time going to sleep. There's been several nights where they've woken up in the middle of the night or woken up early, crying, more tantrums, a little bit more behavioral issues during the day. And, because I know and I, expect this and I was prepared for this, it's not as shocking, but I kind of wanted to share that with you guys, because just don't be alarmed if after these experiences, it takes a couple days for your child to really let out all of those pent up emotions that they've been carrying and holding in, and that it's okay for them to vent. It's okay for them to have issues with sleeping and eating and all of that, because they're still just trying to process everything. And so what I want to talk about in this video is three things, I guess. There's 3 parts. One is how to best prepare for a family emergency. 2 is how to talk to children about death, depending on their age, and some conversational tips. And then 3 is just kind of a catch for all. I'm going to answer a little bit more of your questions. I have my notes right here. So if I'm looking over here, it's because I'm looking at my notes. I want to be sure to make sure this video carries a lot of value for you guys and is helpful. So let's get into the first step, which is how to prepare for an emergency. So I think, I know none of us really like to think about this. We think we'll be fine. It's not going to happen to us, but I do think it's really important just to have a general idea of what your family would do in the event of an emergency, and identifying 4 to 5 close friends, family members, ideally a neighbor or 2 who you can count on in the event of an emergency. Have their emergency contacts ready to go. Let them know they can list you as an emergency contact. Create a document that you share with them with all of your child's important information, like their insurance, date of birth, all of the things that in case they need it, they would have it all in one document. You could create a Google Doc and share it with everybody, or however you want to do that. But really talking to, other caregivers, your spouse, about what would be the plan loosely, what would be your go-to plan in the event of emergency, who would take care of your children, and how you would handle all that. It's just really important to think about those things, because when it happens, you want to have a plan in place ideally. There's also too, because I know there's a lot of families that we're away from our close families, or we don't really have a lot of people in the area that we could count on. And in that case, maybe looking into babysitter agencies who provide 24/7 care. I know that there is one called Nanny Poppins, where they have babysitters that are on standby 24/7. So you may want to look into services like that, just in case, in the event that you have a family emergency, just having a backup plan of who would watch your child in that case. And again, when you're explaining what's going on, keep your words brief, keep it very simple, keep it very matter of fact, and then invite them to ask questions. Okay, what questions do you have, right? You might want to let them know, nothing you did caused this, because sometimes, and I'll talk about this a little bit later in the video about, depending on your child's age, but depending, if your child is a toddler preschooler, they can tend to be very egocentric and think that they somehow caused this and have some magical thinking there and some misconceptions. So you want to be sure to, let them know nothing that you did caused this. Mommy's going to go, or daddy is going to go check on Papa, or whatever it is. Of course, it might not be that case, but okay. And then if just keeping in contact with them through FaceTime or phone, if you have to be away from your children, if they're in the hospital, or going to the hospital to do visits with sick family members, and try to keep the stays short, the visits short, right? Just to kind of make sure it's not too overwhelming for them. Check in with them often about it. And then, of course, spend a lot of your time and a lot of your focus on reconnecting, the reconnecting stage after you reunite. Just know, expect behavioral issues, expect things to change with their eating and sleeping patterns, and just know that that's okay, and that is part of the process. It's not anything you're doing. Just keep focusing on reconnecting, playing with them, staying present as much and as best as you can. Okay, so in terms of part 2, which is kind of the meat of this video, is how to explain death to young children. And I know that this is can be a really hard topic for us parents. Death brings up a lot for us. Everybody's different and has their own processes, but speaking in generalities here, usually death is a hard thing for us humans, right? And I think that, in society, we don't really talk about it. We don't talk about it a lot. But it really is obviously an inescapable aspect of life, and it's happening all around us, even if we're not aware of it, right? From whether our houseplant died, or we see a dead bug or roadkill on the side of the road, or it's in movies and books and TV shows. I mean, we're surrounded by the theme of death and loss. And what I want to say first is that even though we feel anxiety about it, it's actually really, really important to start the conversations about death and normalize it throughout daily life, right? It's going to be not only a very important thing to do, because you can plan and practice, talking about this ideally before, family emergencies and things like that, and death and loss happens within your family system, whether it's a pet or a family member or a loved one or a close family friend. And so ideally, you're talking about this, you're practicing, you're normalizing it, so that when it does happen and it hits home, it's not as jarring for young children. But I will also say that depending on your child's age, their understanding of death is going to be limited. So, of course, infants and toddlers, they can't understand the concept of death. They can understand the general emotional tone of the family. They can understand that we are, sad and grieving. or that we're experiencing sadness, but they're not going to understand the concept of death just yet. It's not until children are around 4 where they can understand death more, but even around this age, children tend to be really concrete thinkers, and they might not understand the finality of death, right? And they might not understand that, death happens to everybody, that it's a universal thing, and they might think it's more temporary. And again, they tend to think in very concrete terms, right? They tend to understand things very literally and exactly how they hear it or see it. So that's why it's always important to avoid euphemisms like, he's traveled to the great beyond, or they've passed away, or she's gone to sleep, because that can cause them to develop these fears and anxiety about sleep, about travel, and those things. And you don't want to create more fear, right? And you don't want to create more confusion, because that's what can often happen, because again, they think very concretely. So what you say, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, so she went to sleep, or she traveled to this great beyond. Oh my goodness, I don't want to travel there, or I don't want to go to sleep anymore, those kind of things. So you don't want them developing any irrational fears, because while these euphemisms might help us feel better as adults, children, it's beyond their understanding and their scope of being able to cognitively grasp those concepts. So keep your language very simple and very concrete and factual based. So for example, if their grandmother passed away, you can say something like, grandma died. That means we can no longer see her. So grandma's body stopped working. That means they can't eat, they can't sleep or play anymore, and we can't see grandma anymore. But the memory of grandma lives forever. So that's what you can kind of like soften the blow a little bit by also sharing with them that we can still think about grandma, we can still remember her, we can still celebrate her, those kinds of things. So again, being very concrete and avoiding any fluffy language when it comes to death. Okay, and the other thing to be aware of is just to be prepared, or don't be surprised if your child keeps asking you the same questions over and over and over about what happened, right? And it's not because they are trying to look for a deeper meaning or they don't believe you. It's only because they just want to keep hearing it again. So they need consistency in your message. So just keep saying the same thing that you've been saying. Don't, get ruffled if they start asking the same questions. It's very common. They're still thinking about it. They're still processing and trying to understand it. So the best you can do is to keep your language very consistent and just keep saying the same thing and then inviting them to ask questions. So you always want to end with, what questions do you have for me? Let's keep talking about this, right? I'm not scared to talk about this. I'm glad you're asking me questions. I'm glad we're talking about that. So, in terms of whether or not you decide to incorporate religious beliefs or spirituality beliefs into your explanation of death and dying is totally up to you, right? Everybody is coming at it differently. I just will say, just be sure again to stay very concrete in your explanations, and to avoid using language that can be kind of confusing or scary for children, like God is happy to see her, or God wanted her with him, or she's happy now that God is with her, or that God took her, because just know that some of that can cause children some confusion and fear, right? Of, oh my gosh, well, if she's happy that God took her, why is everybody so sad? Or is God going to take me next? Or is God going to take you? Those kind of things. So, you can say something along the lines of, this is just a suggestion of, we're sad that she isn't here. We'll miss her very much. But it's comforting to know that she's with God, or something like that. So focusing on your emotional process with it. But again, this will be highly dependent on your own, different spiritual and religious practices. Just kind of be mindful of your language and make sure you stay concrete of what happened, the physical realities of what happened to her body, and that she's dead, or they're dead, whoever it is. And then let's see here. So the other thing is, again, watch out for the signs of stress. And it's okay if your child can't verbalize their feelings, especially immediately, right? And don't be alarmed if these themes of death and loss and grief show up in play, because this is primarily the language of childhood, right? And toys are our children's words, essentially. So a lot of the times they're going to prefer to process it out through play, and so just allow that to happen. Be more of the observer, to follow their lead. Know that this is all healthy and really, really good. Really, really good if you start to see that in their play. That just means that they're trying to process it out, share it with you, and that's their way of doing all of that, right? And again, don't be alarmed if there's more behavioral issues, like in more sleep and eating issues, as they are experiencing stress and change from all of this. Now, if you have a school age child, so that's between 6 and 9 or 10, this age range is when they start to understand that death is more final, but they may not grasp that yet, that it's universal or the root of death, right? They may think that the boogeyman caused it or something like that. So there still is some misconceptions. So you want to, when you're talking with them, just listen out for any of that. Listen out for those cues that maybe they have misinterpreted what happened, and constantly, again, be asking them, what questions do you have? What do you think about this? I mean, you don't want to pressure them too much to share if they're not ready to, but just, I guess, come from that presence of, hey, I want to help you. What questions do you have? It's always okay to come to me if you want to ever talk about it, or if you ever have a question or a concern. Some other questions that you guys asked me to share about was answering the question of why or how did they die? When is that appropriate, or how should you navigate that process? And I think, especially when we're talking about the little ones, 0 to 5, especially, I wouldn't even start talking about the method at which the person died until later, until they're older, closer to 4 or 5. But if they're asking these questions, then that means that they're ready. Again, you just want to keep your language very simple. So you can say, grandma's heart was very old and the doctors did all that they could to fix it, but unfortunately, they couldn't fix it, and her body stopped working, right? And that means that she can't eat or drink or sleep or play, and that we can't see her anymore. But again, she'll always be with us in memory. We can always think about her and celebrate her and essentially talk to her, if that feels like something that sounds good to you. And in terms of explaining suicide, because I know that was a question, I would emphasize that there was an illness in the brain. As they're older, they can understand, there's an illness in the brain and it was called depression. So, when they're older, you can get a little bit more specific and a little bit more details. But I would emphasize that they had an illness and it caused their brain to get very confused and very sad. And, that whatever it was, they took a lot of pills, or they used a gun to end their life, to make their body stop working. So you'll kind of have to gauge, though, depending on your child's age and their cognition, how much they can grasp at their different ages, and what you feel comfortable disclosing. This is always going to be a judgment call, and it's always going to be case specific. So I can't, just give you guys a blanket solution or answer to a lot of these questions, but those are some of the language that I would suggest. And then how much to divulge and what specifics to share is entirely up to you, and will be dependent on what your child can understand. But I will say, start simple and start with 1 or 2 sentences, and then stop and check in with them. Okay, what did you hear mommy say? What questions do you have for me right now? And then, decide how you're going to proceed next, right? So take your time with this, right? You don't need to rush through these conversations or just blurt out a bunch of stuff and then be like, okay, bye, that kind of thing. So keep it slow, and always be checking in with them about, what questions do they have? What concerns do they have? And again, for older kids is when you can start to explain, the disease called depression and all of that. And then, what is important if you're talking about the concept of suicide is, who could you ask for help if you're feeling really sad, right? If you ever felt depressed or wanted to, end your life or make your body stop working, who could you reach out for support? So that's always like a follow-up question that you want to ask them, just to make sure that they have, as you're talking about this, that they kind of have that concept down too, that they can always ask for help and that they've identified people that they can talk to. Another question that your child might ask is like, will you die or will I die? And explaining to them that most people die when they're old, when they're very old or they're very sick or that they're very sick. So just explaining to them that, especially if this happened to somebody who was very young, that this isn't the common norm, and that most people will live until they're old, right? And that this doesn't happen very often. Another question is, how to explain death to someone that they've never met before. It would be the same approach, right? If it was like, let's say a grandma or grandpa that your child never met, you can still explain the concept of death similarly, right? To what I said, their body stopped working, they're dead. That means that we can't see them anymore. And that this happened before you were born, but you can, share pictures with them, talk about them, share, recipes of what they enjoyed to cook or what they enjoyed to eat with them, and help keep the memory alive, even if they haven't ever met that person before. Other things to keep in mind, as you're processing this, if your family is going through this right now, to try to keep your routines the same, right? So when your child is experiencing a lot of stress and chaos and change, the most important thing you can do is keep the routines the same, right? Because children thrive from predictability and routine, right? They feel safer and more contained when they can really predict their environment. So keep the routines the same as best as possible. Of course, things will come up, things will feel a little chaotic, but if there is one thing you could do, keep the routines the same. The times that they wake up, the times they go to sleep, the times they eat and play, nap, all of that. Keep that the same as much as you can. Expect repeated questions, of course. Just stay consistent. Don't try to hide your feelings. I know this is a question or a concern that comes up when we talk about this topic, but it's important to show your child, what you're going through, but then explain your feelings, right? So you want to just explain, mommy is feeling very sad right now. I'm crying because, I can never see grandma again, and that makes me feel really sad, but it's okay for me to feel sad, right? I can let my emotions out. So you're, showing them this, but explaining to them what's going on for you emotionally as best as you can, just so that it's not so confusing. But, overall, I will say that it's so important I think this is why it's so important. And if you don't remember anything from this video, I will hope that you remember it's so important to incorporate this concept of death and dying into everyday life, because again, it's happening all around us. And so we can help our child understand this inescapable fact of life by pointing it out to them, right? Like, even if it's a rotten fruit, right? Oh, wow, the fruit was living and now it is rotten, right? It means we can't eat it anymore, right? Or the plant has died and it is no longer living, right? It can no longer take in sunlight and drink water. It will no longer grow. It won't be able to come back, right? Those kind of things is important to help your child understand, just in even everyday life around them. And it doesn't have to mean it's a bad thing or a cynical thing. It's an honest fact of life. Even a bubble bursting or popping is a symbol that things come and go and things are not forever, right? And things come to an end. And so, you know, the more that you feel comfortable talking about death, the better I think able your child will be to understand it and process it for themselves. Of course, it's okay if, you know, this is hard for you. And I will say, you know, similarly to a lot of things in parenting, the more we have a grasp on it, the more we can try to understand and process it for ourselves, the better able we can then, of course, help our child understand these things. I hope this video was helpful. I probably will end up doing a part 2. I'd love to just keep this conversation going because I know that this is a hard concept and a hard thing for us as parents to navigate through, especially when we're going through our own stress and our own grief and loss. So leave any additional questions that you have down below. I'm always listening to your guys' questions as I try to make more helpful content for you. And again, don't forget to sign up for the free discipline workshop. It will be happening very, very soon. Limited time, space is limited, and I hope to see you guys there. So you can visit www.themomspsychologist.com/workshop or visit the link down below in the description box to save your seat. I cannot wait to see you there. And until next time, I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.